Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. I am Adam Bilsing, this is Dirty Bandana Music, and today I'm going to show you how to make diffusers. So first things first, why make diffusers? Why go through all the trouble of gluing all these tiny pieces together in these weird shapes? Well, the main reason for diffusers in your recording studio is they will randomize reflections. So these don't absorb any sound at all, as it might be obvious because they're all very hard wood and very reflective surfaces. But the purpose of these things is when the sound waves come at your diffuser, since all of these little 2x2s are coming out from the wall different distances, the sound will be reflected back off of the wall at slightly different times. So you can imagine a sound wave hitting this all at once, and then as it takes extra milliseconds or less milliseconds to get into the surfaces of these various diffuser pieces, it will change ever so slightly the time that it takes to reflect the sound wave back out into the rest of the room. So the whole purpose for diffusers is randomized reflections. So nothing up in this room right now is absorptive at all. We've got all hard surfaces in every direction, and everything is still reflecting quite a bit at the moment. So after getting all these diffusers installed and having all of that part of the sound treatment done, the next step is going to be to get some absorber panels and get them in the spaces just like right behind me, in between all of the diffusers. So now that you know why we do it, let's talk a little bit about how I did it. The assembly method, which there should be plenty of footage of here. The first thing I had to do was cut all of these little 2x2 pieces. Now, I did various amounts of math and tried to count it out while I was doing all of this building, but it became a little overwhelming after thinking about how many of these things I actually cut and sanded. But I think, and I know this is gonna sound crazy, I think there are close to 3,000 of these individual 2x2 pieces in the studio right now. So I started with 8-foot lengths from Home Depot. The size of the dimensional lumber is 2" by 2", which is not truly 2" by 2". So if you're doing your measurements, take a second to look at that. I'm pretty sure they're 1.5 by 1.5, but that's a whole nother conversation. So I cut them all up into pieces varying from 2" to 6" on the inch. So I would cut 2", 3", 4", 5", and 6" pieces all the way down the whole 8-foot 2x4. And if I remember right, that gave me about 20 pieces per 8-foot length. So the next thing I would do is sand all of the corners off of all of them. As I ran them through my chop saw, they would get little splintery pieces that, along with not looking very nice, would actually make it so they wouldn't all lay flat against each other, and they wouldn't lay flat against the backing panel when it came time to fasten everything to that. So the next step after cutting was sanding, and that took an awfully long time. Then I would mock up each panel. So I would lay out on the floor this whole backing piece and have the edges outlined. And then I would take 2x2 pieces and, without gluing or anything, just set them all up, arrange them all in a mock-up fashion on the backing so that I knew that I had them all arranged in sort of like a random fashion, and there weren't too many of them that were exactly the same size right next to each other. I kind of made my little design and mocked it up all dry without any glue or anything. Now the next step is I would take and start gluing together chunks of these 2x2s, nothing to do with the backing yet, just chunks that were generally like, I don't know, about that long and that wide. So on these diffusers, which are about 7 feet tall, I would break most of them down into like 4 chunks of 2x2s. Glue together each of those chunks separately. Then I would have them all ready to go, laid out. And at that point, I would glue them and screw them onto the backing so that it was all one piece. Then after I let all of that dry, it was time to bring the whole vertical strip into the studio and get it installed on the wall. which is actually the next step after assembling them. So for most of these, they are taking up one stud bay. So behind the diffuser, there is a space where there's insulation, and there's a stud, a wall stud on either edge. So for most of these, I just ended up running screws into the edges so that they were affixed on each side on the studs, and top and bottom where there were sill plates. There were studs on the sill plates as well, so there was something to screw into on the top and the bottom of the wall. Now for a few of these, they're too wide. So like this one, for example, was wider than one stud bay. It actually took up two stud bays. So there would be a wall stud on either side and also a wall stud in the middle with insulation in between all of them. So what I did for those where they were wide enough that there were multiple studs behind it is I would leave out a couple of 2x2s in a vertical stripe up and down the assembly of the diffuser. So when it came time to fasten them to the walls, I was able to screw them in on the edges and also put some screws in the middle where the middle stud was. And then I took the pieces, the 2x2s that were left over, put a little paint around them, and gently hammered them back into the spot where they were supposed to go. So they look good and complete now, but I was also able to take advantage of the extra structural stud in the middle so that everything is nice and fastened on those wider diffusers. So that's roughly the method. You'll be seeing it as I talk about it. Now, after spending what I think is close to 200 hours on these diffusers, maybe 150 hours, it was a lot of hours. I've come up with some things that I would have done a little differently. So here are some expert tips if you're gonna try this yourself. First thing I would have done differently, I would have found a flatter surface to do all of my gluing, where I was gluing the 2x2s together into chunks. I realized because of the tabletop I have in my workshop that some of these, after I glued the chunk of the 2x2s together, the bottom of it where it's supposed to fasten to the backing board would come out like a little bit wavy. And I think that's something that I could have avoided with a flatter surface when I was assembling the chunks of 2x2 pieces before they went onto the backing board. Another thing I would have done differently that probably would have saved me an awful lot of time is I would have gotten a finer toothed saw blade for my chop saw or miter saw, depending on what you call it. I realized most of the way through that one of the reasons I was having to do so much sanding is that the saw blade on my miter saw was not only old, but it was also made to make kind of rough cuts. The more teeth you have in a saw blade, the finer and nicer of a cut it will make. So if I had to do that all over again, I would have spent some money up front and bought a nicer saw blade for my miter saw with more teeth in it so that it would have led to less sanding. Here's another thing that could have gone a little better. When I went to glue the chunks of 2x2s onto the backing board, I would have 3 or 4 chunks of 2x2s to affix. And I noticed after the first couple that when I put them on the wall, there would be little gaps between these chunks of 2x2s. I don't know if you can see them or not from the vantage point that you're at there, but it's all I see when I look at these things. So I figured it out by the time I got to basically the last diffuser that one of the ways around this was when I went to put them on the backing board, I would not only put glue on the backing board so everything was glued together from that direction, but I painted glue in between the chunks of 2x2s. So when they were pressed together, the glue would try to help hold them together. And then the other thing that I did was I took a ratchet strap, like you use when you're strapping something down on a trailer, and I wrapped it all the way around all of the 2x2s so that I could strap them together so that they would be glued to each other while they were also being glued and fastened to the backing board behind it. And I realized when I did that, it would suck the chunks together and take up some of that space in between them and glue them to each other even better, while also keeping everything nice and straight so that it could be glued and fastened to the backing board. And the last thing that I thought could be an improvement, although this would probably be an expensive improvement unless you had one of these in your shop already, is I would have liked to run all these 2x2s through a planer so that they were all precisely the same size. I noticed when I was going to assemble them, just because of the fact that, you know, if you've ever shopped for dimensional lumber, you understand that it only is going to come out of the sawmill so perfect. And these 2x2s, along with being sort of like twisted and bent sometimes, are oftentimes slightly different widths on one side or the other. So normally you wouldn't notice it, but when I was assembling them together in these vast arrays of 2x2s, anytime that the width was off, I would start to get these strange asymmetrical gaps, and basically the squares weren't all lining up perfectly. So if I was going to do a whole bunch more of these, or if I was starting at the beginning and doing these all over, there's a chance I would purchase a planer so that I could run all these 2x2s through it and make them all precisely square and precisely the same width in every direction, so they would have gone together a little easier. Those are the things I would have changed, but overall I've been very happy with the progress, and I can already kind of hear a difference in the room. So I know if you're listening to the room while I talk, it still is going to sound pretty live right now, and it is still pretty live. I'm standing on plywood subfloor. I've got sheetrock all the way around me and on the ceiling. We still have a lot of parallel surfaces, and the diffusers are up all around the room, but there's no absorption up anywhere yet. So things are pretty bouncy, but I am noticing, and have been noticing as I added these diffusers to the walls, that the reflection is sounding less boxy, less square, a little less gross, which I know is sort of a subjective term, but you're going to be able to tell that they don't sound good. They're all going to sort of converge at the same spot in weird timing. You might notice phase issues just when you speak, but I've been able to tell as these diffusers have gone up in here that the reflection is getting more and more randomized. I don't know if this is going to play without actually getting some instruments in here and playing some music, but I'm very pleased. There's a lot of talking to say that I'm very pleased with the outcome. And I think these are doing exactly what I'm expecting them to do. Not to mention, they look really cool. I've never been in a studio that's got this many diffusers in it, and there still is some finish work to do and trim work and everything like that, but really they look very nice and impressive, frankly. Like, it looks like a lot of work was done. So I'm very happy to be done with them because they took a lot of hours, but I'm also very happy that I did it because I think these are going to be a wonderful addition to the studio design as a whole, and I think they're going to really be noticeable once we start recording in here, which is getting ever closer. So I think that's it for the diffuser video. Hopefully you've learned a little bit about how to put these things together. If you got questions or comments, hit me in the section for comments below. Of course, like and subscribe. There'll be lots more studio build videos on the way as I continue to finish up this room and start tracking sounds in here, using it like a real recording studio. You can also catch me on Instagram at Dirty Bandana, or you can get all the details for everything that I'm up to on my website at dirtybandana.com. That's it for now. We'll see y'all next time.